Part 1. The Awakening. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to thrive in the face of challenges, while others crumble at the first sign of difficulty? Why do some individuals keep growing, learning, and evolving throughout their entire lives, while others plateau early and never quite reach their potential? The answer isn't what most people think. It's not about intelligence. It's not about talent. It's not even about luck or privilege. The answer lies in something far more fundamental, something that shapes every decision you make, every risk you take, and every dream you pursue. It's about your mindset. For decades, we've been sold a lie. Society tells us that greatness is reserved for the naturally gifted, the prodigies, the geniuses, the born athletes, the creative savants. We've been conditioned to believe that our abilities are fixed, that we're either smart or we're not, talented or mediocre, destined for success or doomed to mediocrity. This belief system has held millions of people back from realizing their true potential. But what if everything you thought you knew about success was wrong? What if the very beliefs you hold about yourself are the only things standing between you and the life you want? Dr. Rebecca Morgan spent 30 years researching human achievement, studying thousands of people across different fields, from elementary school classrooms to Fortune 500 boardrooms, from Olympic training facilities to struggling startups. What she discovered changed everything we thought we knew about success, failure, and human potential. Her research revealed a simple but profound truth. The view you adopt for yourself profoundly affects the way you lead your life. She identified two distinct mindsets that people carry with them, two different ways of viewing their abilities and potential. She called them the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. This isn't just another self-help theory. This is backed by rigorous scientific research, brain imaging studies, and decades of real-world observation. The implications are staggering. Your mindset doesn't just influence how you feel. It literally shapes your brain, determines which neural pathways get strengthened, and ultimately creates your reality. Think about it. Right now, at this very moment, you're operating from one of these two mindsets. Every time you face a challenge, every time you receive criticism, every time you encounter failure, your mindset is quietly working in the background, interpreting the situation and determining how you'll respond. In our modern world, we worship talent. We celebrate child prodigies and natural athletes. We watch reality TV shows searching for the next big star. We've created an entire culture around the idea that some people just have it and others don't. This cultural obsession with innate ability has created a generation of people afraid to try, afraid to fail, afraid to look foolish. But here's the truth that most people never discover. Talent is just a starting point. What you do with that talent, or lack thereof, is what actually matters. The most successful people in any field aren't necessarily the most talented. They're the ones who believed they could improve, who embraced challenges, who learned from criticism, and who persisted despite setbacks. Consider Sarah, a marketing executive in Seattle. For years, she believed she wasn't creative. "I'm just not a creative person," she'd say, deflecting any projects that required innovative thinking. She saw creativity as a fixed trait. You either had it or you didn't. This belief kept her in the same position for 8 years, watching colleagues with natural creativity get promoted around her. Then something shifted. After a particularly frustrating performance review, Sarah began to question her assumptions. What if creativity wasn't fixed? What if it was something she could develop? She started small, taking an online design course, joining a creative writing workshop, forcing herself to brainstorm 10 ideas every morning, no matter how bad they were. 6 months later, Sarah was unrecognizable. She was pitching creative campaigns, leading innovation meetings, and had become known as one of the most inventive thinkers in her company. Had she suddenly become talented? No. She had changed her mindset, and that change had unlocked abilities that were there all along. This is what mindset research reveals. We are far more capable of growth than we ever imagined. The brain is not fixed. It's plastic, constantly forming new connections, constantly adapting. Every time you push yourself to learn something new, your brain physically changes. Neural pathways are created and strengthened. What felt impossible yesterday becomes possible today. But here's where it gets interesting. Simply knowing about mindsets isn't enough. You can read about growth mindset, understand it intellectually, even believe in it, and still operate from a fixed mindset in your daily life. Why? Because mindset isn't just a belief. It's a collection of deeply ingrained patterns formed over years of experiences, reinforced by culture, education, and the voices of authority figures in our lives. When you were a child, every interaction with parents, teachers, and coaches was shaping your mindset. When your teacher said, "You're so smart," after you aced a test, she was inadvertently planting the seeds of a fixed mindset. You learned that being smart was important, that it defined you. So what happened when you encountered something difficult? Your brain panicked. If I can't do this easily, maybe I'm not smart after all. Contrast that with a child who hears, "I can see how hard you worked on this." That child learned something entirely different. They learn that effort leads to achievement, that struggle is part of growth, that their abilities can be developed. When they encounter difficulty, they don't panic, they lean in. These early messages create powerful neural patterns that persist into adulthood. They become the lens through which you see every challenge, every opportunity, every potential failure. They whisper in your ear when you're about to take a risk, when you're facing criticism, when you're struggling to learn something new. The fixed mindset voice says, "You're not good at this. Don't embarrass yourself. Stick to what you know." If it's hard, it means you don't have the talent for it. The growth mindset voice says, "This is hard, but that means you're learning. You're not good at this yet." Every expert was once a beginner. Struggle is where growth happens. Throughout your life, you've been listening to one of these voices more than the other. And that voice has shaped your trajectory more than any external circumstance ever could. Dr. Morgan's research laboratory conducted a fascinating experiment with college students. They brought in hundreds of students and gave them a challenging problem to solve. Before they started, researchers randomly divided them into two groups. The first group was told, "This test measures your intelligence. We want to see how smart you are." The second group was told, "This test is an opportunity to learn. We want to see what strategies you develop as you work through these problems." Same test, same students, dramatically different outcomes. The students who thought they were being judged on their intelligence became anxious. Many gave up quickly when problems got difficult. They avoided challenging questions. Some even cheated to maintain their self-image as smart. The students who thought they were there to learn behaved completely differently. They engaged deeply with difficult problems. They tried multiple strategies. They didn't see struggle as a threat to their identity. They saw it as part of the learning process. Even when they failed to solve problems, they reported enjoying the experience. This experiment has been replicated hundreds of times with children and adults in academic settings and corporate environments, with athletes and artists. The results are always the same. The mindset you bring to a challenge fundamentally changes how you engage with it, how much you learn from it, and, ultimately, whether you succeed. But let's be clear about something. Adopting a growth mindset doesn't mean believing that anyone can become anything with enough effort. That's not the point, and it's not what the research shows. A growth mindset means believing that your basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. It means understanding that brains and talent are just the starting point, not the end point. You might never become an Olympic gymnast if you start at age 40 with no athletic background. But you can become remarkably flexible, strong, and skilled. You might never become a concert pianist if you've never touched a keyboard. But you can learn to play, to read music, to create something beautiful. The ceiling on your potential is much higher than you think, but you'll never discover it if you believe your abilities are fixed. Here's what's crucial to understand. Everyone has both mindsets. You might have a growth mindset about your career, but a fixed mindset about your relationships. You might believe you can learn new technical skills, but think you're just not a creative person. You might push yourself athletically, but avoid any situation where you might look socially awkward. Mindset isn't a binary switch. It's more like a dial that shifts depending on the situation, the stakes, and your emotional state. Under stress, most people default to a fixed mindset. When we're tired, scared, or feeling vulnerable, that old voice comes back. You're not good enough. Don't even try. The goal isn't to eliminate the fixed mindset voice entirely. That's probably impossible. The goal is to recognize it when it appears and to consciously choose a different response. To hear that voice say, "You'll never be able to do this," and answer back, "I can't do it yet, but I'm learning." This shift from "I can't" to "I can't yet" is one of the most powerful cognitive reframes you can make. That tiny word "yet" opens up a world of possibility. It transforms a judgment about your current state into an acknowledgement of your potential for growth. Think about the implications of this in your own life. How many opportunities have you turned down because you didn't think you had the right skills? How many times have you stayed silent in a meeting because you weren't confident enough in your ideas? How many relationships have you avoided because you labeled yourself as bad at relationships? How many creative pursuits have you abandoned after the first clumsy attempt? Your fixed mindset has been making these decisions for you, quietly closing doors, limiting your world, keeping you safe but small. And the tragic part is that you probably didn't even realize it was happening. You just thought, "That's not for me. I'm not that kind of person." But what if you're wrong? What if you've been operating under a set of assumptions about yourself that were never true? What if the only thing holding you back is the story you've been telling yourself about your limitations? Dr. Morgan's research shows that when people shift from a fixed to a growth mindset, remarkable things happen. Students who were failing start succeeding. Athletes who plateaued begin improving again. Executives who were stuck in their careers suddenly find new opportunities opening up. Relationships that were struggling begin to heal. This isn't magic. It's not positive thinking or wishful fantasy. It's a fundamental rewiring of how you interpret your experiences. When you adopt a growth mindset, failure stops being a judgment of your worth and becomes information about what to try next. Criticism stops being an attack and becomes feedback for improvement. Other people's success stops being threatening and becomes inspiring. The research is unequivocal. The mindset you hold about your abilities shapes your entire reality. It determines which opportunities you notice, which risks you take, how much effort you expend, how you respond to obstacles, and, ultimately, how far you go. Most people live their entire lives never questioning their fundamental beliefs about their potential. They accept the labels they were given as children, smart or slow, artistic or analytical, good with people or awkward, athletic or clumsy, and they build their entire identity around these labels. But labels are just stories, and stories can be rewritten. The question isn't whether you're talented enough, smart enough, or capable enough. The question is, are you willing to embrace the discomfort of not knowing, of struggling, of looking foolish as you learn? Are you willing to trade the comfortable certainty of your limitations for the uncomfortable possibility of growth? Because that's what a growth mindset really requires. It requires courage. It requires humility. It requires a willingness to be a beginner again, to suck at something, to receive criticism, to fail publicly. None of that is easy. Our culture doesn't celebrate struggle. It celebrates effortless brilliance. But effortless brilliance is usually an illusion, a carefully curated Instagram version of someone's journey that hides all the messy, difficult, unglamorous work that made success possible. Over the course of this exploration, we're going to dive deep into how mindset operates in different domains of life. We'll look at how it shapes athletic performance, business success, relationships, parenting, and education. We'll examine the neuroscience behind mindset, the cultural forces that shape it, and most importantly, the practical strategies for changing it. But first, you need to understand something fundamental. Your current mindset isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility. You didn't choose the messages you internalized as a child. You didn't decide which neural pathways would get strengthened through years of experience. But you can choose what happens next. Starting right now, you have a choice. You can continue operating from the same mindset patterns that have been running your life up to this point. Or you can begin the difficult, rewarding work of transformation. You can stay in your comfort zone, or you can step into your growth zone. The path forward won't be easy. Changing deeply ingrained thought patterns never is. There will be days when the fixed mindset voice is loud and convincing. There will be moments when giving up feels like the only reasonable option. There will be times when you'll wonder if any of this is worth the struggle. But here's what I know from decades of research and from witnessing thousands of transformations. On the other side of that struggle is a version of you that you can barely imagine right now. A version that doesn't shrink from challenges. A version that learns from criticism instead of being destroyed by it. A version that sees failure as a stepping stone rather than a dead end. A version that keeps growing, keeps learning, keeps evolving, no matter how old you get. That version of you is already there, waiting. It's been waiting your whole life. All you have to do is start believing it's possible. Part 2. The Architecture of Belief. Let me tell you about two people I know. Their stories will help you understand just how deeply mindset penetrates every aspect of our lives. The first person is Marcus, a software engineer in Austin. Marcus graduated top of his class from MIT. Everyone always told him he was brilliant. His parents framed his report cards. His teachers called him gifted. By the time he was 25, smart had become his identity. Then he joined a startup working on cutting-edge artificial intelligence. Suddenly, Marcus was surrounded by people just as smart as he was, maybe smarter. For the first time in his life, things didn't come easily. He'd spend hours on problems that his colleagues seemed to solve effortlessly. In meetings, people would challenge his ideas, pointing out flaws he hadn't considered. Marcus's response? He started working from home more. He avoided the whiteboard sessions where people collaborated on tough problems. He volunteered only for projects he knew he could handle. When his manager suggested he take on a particularly challenging algorithm, Marcus declined, saying it wasn't his area of expertise. Within a year, Marcus had essentially stopped growing. He was competent at what he already knew, but he'd stopped learning. His career stagnated. Younger engineers who'd been less credentialed than him started getting promoted past him. Marcus became bitter, convinced the company didn't recognize real talent. Now let me tell you about Jennifer. Jennifer barely graduated high school. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and honestly, she wasn't particularly good at it. She made mistakes with scheduling. She sometimes forgot to relay messages. Her boss was patient but worried. One day, Jennifer overheard two dentists talking about a new software system they wanted to implement. They were frustrated because none of the staff seemed tech-savvy enough to learn it. Something clicked for Jennifer. She went home that night and started teaching herself about dental practice management software. She was terrible at first. The tutorials made no sense. She'd spend an hour trying to do something that should have taken 5 minutes. But she kept going. She asked questions, lots of them. She made mistakes and learned from them. She stayed late to practice on the demo system. 3 months later, Jennifer had become the office's go-to tech person. 6 months after that, she was training other staff members. A year later, she'd moved into an office manager role with triple her previous salary. Within 2 years, she was consulting for other dental practices, teaching them how to optimize their systems. Same city, same economy, vastly different outcomes. What made the difference? Marcus had a fixed mindset. His identity was built on being smart, and when that identity was threatened, he protected it by avoiding challenges. Jennifer had a growth mindset. She didn't see her abilities as fixed. She saw them as starting points that could be developed. This is what Dr. Morgan's research revealed. The mindset you hold doesn't just affect your feelings, it affects your behavior, and your behavior determines your results. People with fixed mindsets avoid challenges because challenges threaten their self-image. People with growth mindsets seek out challenges because that's where the learning happens. Let's go deeper into how these two mindsets actually operate in the architecture of your daily life. The fixed mindset, the prison of perfection. When you operate from a fixed mindset, you're constantly trying to prove yourself. Every situation becomes a test. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to confirm or threaten your self-image. Imagine you wake up for an important presentation at work. If you have a fixed mindset, your internal dialogue might sound like this. This presentation will show everyone how competent I am. I need to be perfect. If I mess up, they'll realize I'm not as good as they thought. I should stick to what I know for sure. Don't take risks. Don't admit uncertainty. This mindset turns every performance into a referendum on your worth. And here's the insidious part. It works. Until it doesn't. Fixed mindset people can be very successful, especially early in life. If you're naturally talented at something, you can coast for a long time on that talent. You look smart, you feel confident, you get praised. But then you hit a wall, a level of difficulty where natural talent isn't enough anymore. And that's when the fixed mindset reveals its fatal flaw. When people with fixed mindsets encounter serious difficulty, they have several predictable responses. They give up quickly. Why? Because if you're struggling, it must mean you don't have the talent for it. Better to quit now than to keep trying and prove you're inadequate. They lie or cheat. In one of Dr. Morgan's studies, students with fixed mindsets were given a difficult test and told they'd failed. Later, when given the opportunity to look at tests from other schools, 40% of fixed mindset students lied about their scores to look better. They'd rather cheat than admit they'd failed. They make excuses. I didn't really try. I was tired. The test wasn't fair. These excuses protect their self-image. If they didn't really try, then the failure doesn't mean they lack ability. They avoid challenges. Fixed mindset students, when offered a choice between a challenging new task or an easy task they'd already mastered, overwhelmingly chose the easy task. They'd rather look smart than learn something new. They feel threatened by others' success. If abilities are fixed, then someone else's success makes you feel inadequate by comparison. Fixed mindset people often feel jealous, defensive, or competitive when colleagues succeed. Think about how exhausting this is. You're constantly monitoring yourself, constantly worried about looking bad, constantly protecting your image. You can't take risks because risks might reveal limitations. You can't ask for help because that would show weakness. You can't admit mistakes because mistakes mean you're flawed. The fixed mindset turns life into a performance where you're always on stage, always being judged, never allowed to be a work in progress. Here's a specific example from the corporate world. A major tech company brought in Dr. Morgan to study their engineering teams. They noticed that some teams were innovative and productive, while others were stagnant and risk-averse. When she interviewed the teams, she found something fascinating. The stagnant teams were filled with people who'd been hired because they were the best and the brightest. They'd all come from top schools. They'd all had impressive credentials. And they'd all been told repeatedly how talented they were. These engineers had developed fixed mindsets about their abilities. In meetings, they were afraid to suggest ideas that might be wrong. They spent more time defending their past decisions than exploring new possibilities. They viewed questions as attacks. They saw collaboration as a threat to their individual recognition. The innovative teams looked different. They had engineers from diverse backgrounds, many without prestigious credentials. But they'd been hired into a culture that valued learning over knowing. Their manager regularly said things like, "I don't know the answer to that. Let's figure it out together." Mistakes were treated as data points, not character flaws. Questions were welcomed, not feared. The innovative teams outperformed the talented teams on every metric, not because they were smarter, but because they were free to take risks, make mistakes, and learn. The growth mindset, the freedom to become. Now let's look at how a growth mindset changes everything. When you have a growth mindset, you're not trying to prove yourself, you're trying to improve yourself. Challenges aren't threats, they're opportunities. Failure isn't a judgment, it's information. Criticism isn't an attack, it's feedback. Same presentation scenario as before, but with a growth mindset. This presentation is a chance to share ideas and get feedback. I've prepared well, but I might not have thought of everything. If people have questions or concerns, that will help me refine my thinking. If something doesn't go perfectly, I'll learn what to do better next time. See the difference? The stakes are lower because your self-worth isn't on trial. You're not trying to prove you're smart. You're trying to get smarter. That shift changes everything. Dr. Morgan studied students across different age groups and found consistent patterns. When students with growth mindsets received poor grades, they studied harder, changed their strategies, and sought help. When students with fixed mindsets received poor grades, they studied less, avoided the subject, and considered cheating. One particularly revealing study involved 7th graders transitioning to junior high. This transition is notoriously difficult. The work gets harder, the grading gets tougher, and many students' grades drop. Students with fixed mindsets saw this as proof they weren't smart enough. Their grades continued declining throughout the year. They started saying things like,
"I'm just not good at math," or "I'm not a science person." Students with growth mindsets saw the difficulty as normal. Of course, junior high is harder. They increased their effort, tried new study strategies, and
asked teachers for help. By the end of the year, many had not only recovered, but were performing better than they had in elementary school. Same transition, same challenges, completely different trajectories. The only difference was mindset. Let's talk about Daniel, a marathon runner I met in Boston. Daniel started running in his 40s after a health scare. He was overweight, out of shape, and painfully slow. His first 5K took him 45 minutes. He walked most of it. A fixed mindset person might have quit right there. I'm not a runner. Some people are athletic. I'm not. But Daniel had a growth mindset. He didn't judge himself against other runners. He judged himself against yesterday's version of himself. He created a simple rule: run a little more each week. Some weeks he added distance. Some weeks he added speed. Some weeks he just ran more consistently. He didn't worry about being the fastest or the best. He focused on being better than last month. 5 years later, Daniel completed the Boston Marathon. Not fast, he finished in the middle of the pack. But 5 years earlier, he couldn't run for 5 minutes without stopping. His time didn't matter. What mattered was the transformation. When I asked him about it, he said something profound. I never thought I was becoming a runner. I just kept running. And one day I realized I'd become someone I never thought I could be. That's the growth mindset in action. You don't need to believe you're capable of everything. You just need to believe you're capable of growth. And then you show up day after day and do the work. The neuroscience of mindset. Here's where it gets really interesting. Mindset isn't just a psychological phenomenon, it's neurological. Brain imaging studies have shown that people with different mindsets literally process information differently. When fixed mindset people receive negative feedback or encounter difficulty, their brains show activity in areas associated with threat and self-protection. Their amygdala lights up, the part of the brain that handles fear and stress. When growth mindset people encounter the same difficulty, their brains show more activity in areas associated with learning and problem solving. Their prefrontal cortex engages, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and adapting strategies. This isn't just correlation, it's causation. Dr. Morgan's team conducted studies where they taught people about brain plasticity, explaining that the brain forms new connections when you learn, that struggling actually strengthens neural pathways, that mistakes are opportunities for the brain to grow. After learning this, just learning it, not even practicing it extensively, participants' brain activity patterns changed. When they encountered difficulty, they started showing more activity in learning centers and less in threat centers. Simply understanding that struggle leads to growth changed how their brains processed challenging situations. This is revolutionary. It means mindset isn't some fixed personality trait you're born with. It's a set of beliefs that shape your neural architecture, and those beliefs can be changed. Every time you choose to view a challenge as an opportunity rather than a threat, you're literally rewiring your brain. Every time you interpret failure as feedback rather than judgment, you're strengthening new neural pathways. Every time you embrace struggle as part of learning, you're building a brain that's more resilient, more adaptable, more capable. The brain is remarkably plastic, capable of change throughout your entire life. Neuroscientists used to think that after childhood, the brain was largely fixed. Now we know that's completely wrong. Your brain at 60 can form new connections, develop new skills, and adapt to new challenges just like it did when you were young. It might take longer, it might require more effort, but it's absolutely possible. There's a famous study of London taxi drivers. To get a license, cabbies have to pass the knowledge, a brutal test requiring them to memorize 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks. Brain scans showed that successful taxi drivers had enlarged hippocampi, the part of the brain responsible for spatial memory. Their brains had physically changed in response to the challenge of learning. But here's the kicker. This change happened in adults. Many of these cabbies were in their 30s, 40s, even 50s when they learned the knowledge. Their brains weren't too old to change. They changed because they were challenged. Your brain doesn't care how old you are. It responds to how you use it. Challenge it, and it grows. Protect it from difficulty, and it stagnates. The talent myth. Let's address one of the most damaging myths in modern culture, the talent myth. This is the belief that some people are just naturally gifted at certain things, and if you're not one of those people, you might as well not bother trying. This myth is everywhere. We see child prodigies on YouTube and think, I could never do that. We watch Olympic athletes and assume they were born with superhuman abilities. We read about successful entrepreneurs and imagine they had some innate business sense we lack. But research consistently shows that talent is vastly overrated as a predictor of success. Yes, there are genetic differences that give some people advantages in certain areas. Some people are naturally taller, which helps in basketball. Some people have perfect pitch, which helps in music. Some people have better fast-twitch muscle fibers, which helps in sprinting. But those natural advantages are just starting points. What you do with them matters infinitely more than having them in the first place. Dr. Morgan studied musicians at a prestigious conservatory. She found that the best performers weren't the ones who'd shown the most early talent. They were the ones who'd practiced the most deliberately and consistently. By the time they were 20, the best violinists had accumulated over 10,000 hours of focused practice. The good violinists had accumulated about 7,500 hours. The talent gap at age 5 didn't predict who'd be great at 20. The effort gap did. Similar patterns show up everywhere. Chess champions weren't necessarily child prodigies. Top surgeons weren't always the students with the best grades. Successful writers weren't always the ones with the most natural way with words. What they all had was a growth mindset that kept them engaged when things got difficult, that made them view practice as opportunity rather than drudgery, that helped them persist when talent alone would have let them quit. Consider the Williams sisters, Venus and Serena. People look at them and assume they were born to play tennis. But their father started training them when they were 4 years old. on public courts in Compton with broken nets and cracked pavement. They hit thousands of balls every week for years. By the time they were teenagers, they'd accumulated more practice hours than most people accumulate in a lifetime. Were they talented? Sure. But lots of kids are talented at sports and never become champions. What made Venus and Serena different was the mindset their father instilled. Tennis wasn't something you were good at or bad at. It was something you got better at through relentless effort. The talent myth is comforting in a perverse way. If success requires natural talent, then you're off the hook. "I'm just not naturally good at that" becomes an acceptable reason not to try, not to struggle, not to put yourself through the discomfort of learning. But it's a lie that limits you. The truth is far more empowering. You can develop abilities you don't currently have. You can get better at things you're currently bad at. You're not stuck being the person you are today. Part 3. Mindset in the Arena. The Champion's Edge. Let me tell you about two athletes who changed how we think about greatness. The first is Tom Brady. If you followed football in the early 2000s, you remember when he was drafted. 6th round, 199th overall pick. Teams passed on him 198 times. Scouts said he was too slow, too weak, lacked the physical tools to succeed in the NFL. One scouting report literally said he had poor build and skinny and narrow. Brady could have believed them. He could have accepted that he didn't have what it takes. Instead, he became obsessed with improvement. He watched more film than anyone. He studied defenses like a graduate student studying for finals. He worked with trainers to rebuild his body. He analyzed every throw, every decision, every mistake. 20 years later, he's won more Super Bowls than any quarterback in history. Not because he was the most talented, dozens of quarterbacks were more naturally gifted, but because he had a mindset that turned every setback into data, every criticism into a training opportunity, every season into a chance to get better. Now consider Jerry Rice, widely regarded as the greatest wide receiver ever to play football. Rice wasn't the fastest player. He didn't have the best vertical jump. At the NFL Combine, his numbers were mediocre at best. But Rice had something that mattered more than any physical measurement: an absolutely relentless work ethic rooted in a growth mindset. His off-season training regimen was legendary. While other players rested, Rice ran hills until he vomited. He practiced catching balls for hours, focusing on the tiny details: hand placement, body position, route precision that most players ignored. A reporter once asked him if he was afraid of being outworked by younger, more talented receivers. Rice laughed. "Nobody is going to outwork me," he said. "They might be more talented, but they're not going to be more prepared." That's the growth mindset in its purest form. Rice didn't worry about what he couldn't control, his natural speed or jumping ability. He focused obsessively on what he could control: his preparation, his technique, his knowledge of the game. Dr. Morgan spent years studying elite athletes, and she found this pattern repeatedly. The champions weren't always the most talented. They were the ones who viewed their abilities as developable, who embraced difficult training, who learned from losses instead of being destroyed by them. She studied gymnasts preparing for the Olympics. The gymnasts who made the team weren't necessarily the ones with the most natural flexibility or strength. They were the ones who responded to coaching with curiosity instead of defensiveness, who pushed through plateaus instead of giving up, who analyzed their mistakes instead of making excuses. One gymnast she interviewed said something revealing. "When I fall, I don't think I'm bad at this. I think my brain just learned something new about him." Balance. Every fall makes my next attempt better. Compare that to a fixed mindset athlete who views every mistake as evidence of inadequacy. When they fall, they think, "I'm not good enough. I don't belong here." That internal narrative creates anxiety, which leads to more mistakes, which reinforces the negative belief. It's a vicious cycle that ends careers. The business battlefield. The business world is littered with the corpses of companies led by fixed mindset executives. You know the pattern: meteoric rise followed by spectacular collapse. Enron, WorldCom, Lehman Brothers. What did they have in common? Leaders who believed they were infallible geniuses. Kenneth Lay, Jeffrey Skilling, and the other Enron executives created a culture that worshipped talent and punished failure. They hired the smartest people from the best schools. They paid enormous salaries to these supposed geniuses, and they created an environment where admitting you didn't know something was career suicide. The result? People faked knowledge. They hid problems. They made increasingly reckless decisions rather than admit they'd made mistakes. The smartest people in the room created one of the biggest corporate disasters in history because their fixed mindsets wouldn't allow them to say, "I was wrong. I need help. I need to learn." Now contrast that with leaders who built enduring companies through growth mindset principles. Take Jack Welch at General Electric. When he became CEO, GE was a good company, but it had become bureaucratic and complacent. Welch could have come in acting like he had all the answers, like many fixed-mindset CEOs do. Instead, he created what he called a learning culture. He started a program called Workout, where employees at every level could challenge existing processes and suggest improvements. He told managers that their job wasn't to be the smartest person in the room, it was to create an environment where the best ideas could emerge, regardless of where they came from. Welch regularly admitted when he didn't know something. He sought out criticism. He changed his mind when presented with better information. He told employees, "When the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is near." In other words, keep learning or die. Under his leadership, GE's value increased 4,000%. Not because Welch was a genius with all the answers, but because he created a culture where everyone could learn and improve. Or consider Alan Mulally at Ford. When he took over as CEO in 2006, Ford was hemorrhaging money and heading toward bankruptcy. The company culture was toxic. Executives hid problems, blamed each other, and refused to collaborate. Mullally's first big change? He started every leadership meeting by asking people to identify problems and challenges. At first, nobody would speak up. Admitting problems felt dangerous. But Mullally celebrated the first executive brave enough to admit his division was struggling. He gave him a standing ovation. That one act changed everything. It signaled that this was a learning culture, not a blame culture. Problems weren't character flaws, they were opportunities to improve. Within weeks, executives were openly discussing challenges, collaborating on solutions, and actually helping each other instead of competing. Ford was the only American automaker that didn't need a government bailout during the financial crisis. They didn't just survive, they thrived. And it started with a leader who understood that mindset shapes culture, and culture shapes results. The research on this is overwhelming. Companies with growth mindset cultures outperform fixed mindset cultures across every metric. They're more innovative because people aren't afraid to try new things. They're more collaborative because success isn't zero-sum. They're more honest because mistakes are learning opportunities, not career enders. Dr. Morgan studied 7 Fortune 500 companies over 5 years. She assessed their cultures, interviewed employees at every level, and tracked performance metrics. The companies with strong growth mindset cultures had 47% higher employee engagement, 34% greater commitment to the company, and 49% more confidence that the company would support risk-taking and innovation. Those aren't just feel-good numbers, they translated directly to the bottom line. Growth mindset companies had higher profitability, better stock performance, and lower employee turnover. The leadership paradox. Here's something fascinating. The best leaders aren't the smartest people in the room. They're the people who can get the smartest ideas out of the room. Fixed mindset leaders need to be the star. They take credit for successes and deflect blame for failures. They surround themselves with yes-men who won't challenge them. They view questions as insubordination and criticism as betrayal. Growth mindset leaders do the opposite. They hire people smarter than themselves. They actively seek out disagreement and debate. They give credit generously and take responsibility for failures. They view their job as developing others, not showcasing themselves. Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft by changing its mindset. When he became CEO in 2014, Microsoft had become bureaucratic and stuck. The company that had once dominated the tech industry was being outpaced by younger, more innovative competitors. Nadella didn't fire everyone and hire better people. He changed the culture from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. He told employees to stop worrying about being right and start focusing on learning. He rewarded people who admitted mistakes and changed course, not people who stubbornly defended bad ideas. He literally gave every employee a copy of Dr. Morgan's research on growth mindset. He talked about it constantly. He modeled it by openly discussing his own mistakes and what he learned from them. The results speak for themselves. Microsoft's stock price tripled. The company regained its position as an innovation leader. Employee satisfaction soared, all because the leader understood that mindset matters more than talent. Relationships, the ultimate test. Now let's talk about where mindset matters most and gets discussed least: relationships. Most people don't think about mindset in their romantic relationships, friendships, or family dynamics. But it's operating there constantly, shaping every interaction, every conflict, every moment of connection or disconnection. People with fixed mindsets about relationships believe that compatibility is either there or it isn't. They think great relationships should be easy, natural, effortless. They believe that if you have to work at a relationship, it must not be the right relationship. This mindset creates unrealistic expectations and fragile connections. At the first sign of difficulty, and every real relationship has difficulty, fixed mindset people start questioning everything. Maybe we're not right for each other. Maybe they're not my soulmate. Maybe I need to find someone I'm more compatible with. They interpret conflict as a sign of fundamental incompatibility rather than as a normal part of two different people learning to be together. They avoid difficult conversations because raising issues might mean the relationship is broken. They don't work on problems, they just move on to the next relationship, carrying the same mindset and the same patterns with them. Growth mindset people understand that relationships are built, not found. They know that compatibility isn't discovered, it's created through effort, communication, compromise, and growth. They expect challenges because bringing two different humans together will always create friction. When conflict arises, they don't see it as evidence that the relationship is doomed. They see it as information about how to improve. They have difficult conversations because that's how you build intimacy. They work on problems instead of running from them. Dr. Morgan studied couples over a 10-year period. She found that fixed mindset couples were far more likely to divorce. Why? Because they saw problems as permanent character flaws rather than behaviors that could change. When a fixed mindset person's partner does something hurtful, they think, "This is who they are. They'll always be like this." When a growth mindset person's partner does something hurtful, they think, "This is a problem we need to work on together. How can we both do better?" See the difference? One mindset ends the conversation. The other one opens it. She tells a story about two couples she studied. Call them Couple A and Couple B. Couple A had what looked like a perfect relationship. They rarely fought. They always seemed happy. They told friends they were perfectly compatible. But they had a fixed mindset about their relationship. They believed that good relationships shouldn't require work, that their compatibility made everything easy. Then they had their first child. Suddenly, they were exhausted, stressed, financially strained, and spending less time together. Small annoyances became big resentments. Instead of talking about it, they each quietly started wondering if they'd married the wrong person. Within 3 years, they were divorced. Couple B fought all the time. They came from different backgrounds, had different communication styles, saw the world differently. It wasn't easy, but they had a growth mindset about their relationship. They believed that a good relationship was something you built through effort and communication. When they fought, they didn't see it as evidence of incompatibility. They saw it as two people learning to understand each other better. They went to counseling. They read books. They had long, difficult conversations about their needs and fears and expectations. They worked on it. 20 years later, they're still together, deeply connected, genuinely happy. Not because it was easy, but because they were willing to do the work. The same pattern shows up in friendships. Fixed mindset friends expect perfect understanding without effort. They get hurt easily and hold grudges. They avoid difficult conversations. When friendship requires work, they let it fade rather than fighting for it. Growth mindset friends understand that maintaining close relationships requires effort. They have honest conversations about hurt feelings. They forgive more easily because they believe people can change. They invest in friendships even when it's hard. Parenting, the most important mindset. If you're a parent, this might be the most important section you'll ever read. Because the mindset you bring to parenting doesn't just affect you, it shapes your child's entire trajectory. Fixed mindset parents believe their job is to judge and evaluate their children. They praise talent. You're so smart. You're a natural athlete. You're so artistic. They think they're building confidence, but they're actually creating fragility. When you tell a child they're smart, you're giving them a label to live up to. Now they have to keep proving they're smart. If something is hard, they panic. Maybe they're not as smart as everyone thought. So they avoid challenges, they hide mistakes, they cheat if they have to. Anything to maintain the label. Growth mindset parents understand that their job is to develop their children, not judge them. They praise effort. I can see how hard you worked on this. You tried a new strategy. That's great. You didn't give up even when it got difficult. These children learn that their abilities can grow. Challenges become exciting instead of threatening. Mistakes become learning opportunities instead of evidence of inadequacy. Dr. Morgan did a longitudinal study following children from age 5 to age 25. The children whose parents had growth mindsets about parenting had dramatically better outcomes across every measure: academic achievement, emotional resilience, relationship quality, career success. Not because they were more talented, because they'd internalized the belief that they could always improve, that effort mattered more than innate ability, that failure was just feedback. One mother she studied had a powerful realization. She'd always told her daughter, "You're so talented at piano." She thought she was being supportive. Then her daughter hit a difficult piece and wanted to quit. "I'm just not talented enough for this," the daughter said. The mother realized she'd created a fixed mindset. She changed her approach. Instead of praising talent, she started praising practice. "I noticed you worked on that measure 20 times until you got it right. That's dedication. You tried a different fingering when the first one wasn't working. That's problem solving." Within months, her daughter's entire attitude toward piano changed. She stopped worrying about being talented and started focusing on improving. The difficult piece that almost made her quit became an exciting challenge. The same principle applies to teachers and coaches. The best ones don't just teach skills, they teach mindsets. They create environments where struggle is normalized, where mistakes are celebrated as learning opportunities, where the goal isn't to be perfect, but to get better. Part 4. The Makers of Mindset. Where mindsets come from. Your mindset didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built, brick by brick, through thousands of interactions over the course of your childhood and adolescence. Every message you received about your abilities, every response to your successes and failures, every subtle signal from the adults in your life, all of it shaped the lens through which you now see yourself and your potential. Most people never think about this. They just assume this is who I am. This is how I think. But mindset is learned, which means it can be unlearned. Understanding where your mindset came from is the first step toward changing it. Let me tell you about two kids I observed in a classroom study. The first kid, Emily, was sitting at her desk working on a math problem. Her teacher walked by, looked at her work, and said, "Wow, Emily, you got every single one right. You're so smart at math." Emily beamed. She felt proud. The teacher moved on, and Emily sat there feeling good about herself. But watch what happened next. The teacher handed out a new worksheet with harder problems. Emily looked at it, and her face changed. She suddenly looked anxious. She started the first problem, struggled, erased it, started again, erased again. After a few minutes, she raised her hand. "Mrs. Johnson, can I go to the bathroom?" She didn't need the bathroom. She needed to escape. The problems were hard, and if she couldn't solve them easily, maybe she wasn't as smart as the teacher had said. Better to avoid the situation entirely than to prove she wasn't smart after all. Now watch the second kid, David, same classroom, same worksheet. His teacher looked at his work and said, "David, I can see you really thought about these problems. Look at all the different strategies you tried. You didn't give up even on the hard ones. That's excellent effort." David nodded, pleased. When the harder worksheet came out, he attacked it eagerly. He struggled with the problems, too. They were just as hard for him as they were for Emily. But when he got stuck, he didn't panic. He tried different approaches. He asked questions. He kept working. After class, a researcher asked him, "How do you feel about math?" "It's fun," he said. "I like when it's hard because that's when I'm learning." Same classroom, same math problems, completely different experiences. The difference? The messages they received. Emily learned that being smart was what mattered. David learned that trying hard was what mattered. Emily developed a fixed mindset. David developed a growth mindset. This happens millions of times in millions of homes and classrooms every day. Well-meaning parents and teachers trying to boost children's confidence inadvertently create fixed mindsets by praising intelligence instead of effort. The language of mindset. Words matter more than most people realize. The specific language parents and teachers use shapes children's beliefs about their abilities. Dr. Morgan's research team studied hundreds of parent-child interactions. They recorded parents helping their children with homework, playing games, doing everyday activities. Then they analyzed the language parents used. Some parents constantly used what researchers called person praise, praise that focused on the child's traits. "You're so smart. You're a natural at this. You're talented. You're the best." Other parents used what they called process praise, praise that focused on the child's effort and strategies. "You worked really hard on that. I like how you tried different ways to solve it. You didn't give up even when it got difficult. You're learning so much." The researchers then tracked these children for several years. The results were striking. Children who received mostly person praise developed fixed mindsets. They avoided challenges, gave up quickly when things got hard, felt anxious about their performance, were devastated by criticism, lost motivation after setbacks, believed intelligence was fixed. Children who received mostly process praise developed growth mindsets. They sought out challenges, persisted through difficulty, enjoyed learning for its own sake, welcomed feedback and criticism, bounced back quickly from setbacks, believed abilities could be developed. The difference wasn't subtle, it was dramatic. And it all came down to the language their parents used. Here's the thing, parents who used person praise had good intentions. They were trying to build their children's self-esteem. They wanted their kids to feel special and capable. But they were building castles on sand. When you tell a child they're smart, you're giving them an identity to protect. Now, every challenge becomes a threat to that identity. They can't afford to struggle because struggling means they might not be as smart as you said. When you tell a child they worked hard and tried good strategies, you're giving them tools they can use. Now, challenges are opportunities to work hard and try new strategies. Struggling is just part of the process. The parenting paradox. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates the parenting paradox. Two families lived next door to each other in suburban Connecticut. Both had sons the same age, let's call them Ryan and Jason. Both families were loving, supportive, invested in their children's success. But they had very different approaches. Ryan's parents believed their job was to build his confidence. They praised him constantly. "You're so gifted. You're brilliant. You're going to do amazing things." When he brought home good grades, they celebrated his intelligence. When he struggled with something, they reassured him that some things just aren't your strength, and encouraged him to focus on what he was naturally good at. Ryan excelled in elementary school. Things came easily to him, and all that praise felt good. But when he got to high school and the work got harder, something shifted. He started avoiding challenging classes. He chose easy electives instead of AP courses. He dropped out of the math club when problems got difficult. By senior year, he was performing well below his potential, taking the path of least resistance. Jason's parents took a different approach. They rarely praised his intelligence. Instead, they talked about effort and growth. "I noticed you spent an hour on that essay. That's dedication. You tried 3 different ways to solve that problem before you figured it out. That's real problem solving." When he brought home good grades, they acknowledged his hard work. When he struggled, they helped him develop new strategies and reminded him that struggle is how the brain grows. Jason had a harder time in elementary school than Ryan did. Things didn't come as easily. But he developed something more valuable than easy success. He developed resilience. When he got to high school, he deliberately chose challenging courses. He sought out the hardest teachers. When he struggled, he worked harder, asked for help, tried new approaches. By senior year, he was taking college-level classes and thriving. Same neighborhood, similar families, dramatically different outcomes. The difference was mindset, and mindset came from parenting. Now, here's the really important part. Ryan's parents loved their son just as much as Jason's parents loved theirs. They weren't bad parents. They just had the wrong model of how to support their child. They thought building confidence meant protecting him from struggle and praising his intelligence. They didn't realize they were creating fragility instead of strength. The parenting paradox is this. The parents who try hardest to protect their children from failure
often create the most fear of failure. The parents who let their children struggle, who normalize difficulty, who praise effort over outcome. Those are the ones who create truly confident, resilient kids. Teachers, the second shapers. After parents, teachers have the most influence on children's mindsets. And unfortunately, many teachers, despite their best intentions, reinforce fixed mindsets. Dr. Morgan spent a year observing classrooms across different schools. She watched how teachers responded to student struggles, how they praised success, how they handled mistakes. In one classroom, Mrs. Patterson taught 5th grade. She believed that some kids were math kids and others weren't. When certain students struggled with math, she'd say things like, "Don't worry, not everyone is good at math. You're great at reading." She thought she was being kind, helping kids feel okay about their weaknesses. But watch what happened to those students. The ones she labeled as not math kids stopped trying in math class. They internalized the message that math wasn't for them. By 6th grade, many of them had massive math anxiety. By high school, they avoided any career path that required quantitative thinking. She had limited their futures with a few well-intentioned comments. Down the hall, Mr. Chen taught the same grade level. He believed every student could learn math. It just required the right approach and enough effort. When students struggled, he said things like, "This is challenging, and that's good. Your brain is growing right now. Let's try a different strategy." He celebrated mistakes. When a student got a problem wrong, he'd say, "Great. Now we know what doesn't work. What should we try next?" He never labeled students as good or bad at math. He talked about where they were in their learning journey and where they could go. His students developed completely different relationships with struggle. They saw difficulty as a normal part of learning, not as evidence of inadequacy. Many students who'd struggled in previous years blossomed in his class. The difference wasn't the curriculum or the students, it was the teacher's mindset and the messages that mindset sent. Dr. Morgan found this pattern across subjects. English teachers who believed writing ability was fixed created students who were afraid to write. Science teachers who believed some kids got it and others didn't created students who opted out of science careers. History teachers who focused on memorization rather than thinking created students who found history boring. But teachers with growth mindsets transformed their classrooms. They created environments where mistakes were celebrated as learning opportunities. Difficult problems were viewed as exciting challenges. Every student was expected to improve. Effort and strategy were praised over being smart. The question wasn't, "Are you good at this?" but "How can you get better at this?" One particularly powerful study looked at 2 high schools in the same district with similar demographics. School A had mostly fixed mindset teachers. School B had mostly growth mindset teachers. At School A, students were tracked into advanced, regular, and remedial classes based on test scores. Teachers in remedial classes had low expectations. They taught simplified content, moved slowly, focused on memorization. They believed these students couldn't handle complex thinking. The result? Students in remedial classes fell further behind every year. They internalized the message that they weren't capable. Many dropped out. At School B, they eliminated tracking. Every student took challenging classes. Teachers believed all students could learn complex material. They just needed different levels of support. They used scaffolding, peer tutoring, and differentiated instruction, but everyone learned the same core content. The result? Average test scores went up across the board. More students took AP classes. Dropout rates plummeted. Students who would have been tracked into remedial classes at School A were succeeding in challenging coursework at School B. Same district, similar students, completely different outcomes. The difference was teacher mindset. Coaches, the culture creators. The sports world provides the clearest examples of how mindset shapes performance. Great coaches don't just teach skills, they build mindsets. Think about John Wooden, the legendary UCLA basketball coach. He won 10 national championships in 12 years, a record that will probably never be broken. But here's what's interesting. Wooden rarely talked about winning. He talked about improvement. He had a famous saying, "Success is peace of mind," which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to become the best of which you are capable. Notice he didn't say the best player on the court or better than your opponent. He said the best you are capable of. Wooden didn't compare players to each other. He compared them to their own potential. He celebrated improvement, not perfection. He created a culture where every player, from the stars to the bench warmers, was focused on getting better. One of his players later said, "Coach never made me feel bad about not being as talented as some of my teammates. He made me focus on whether I was getting better than I was yesterday. And you know what? That actually made me better than if I'd spent all my time worrying about how I compared to others." That's growth mindset coaching. Compare that to coaches who worship talent. They focus all their attention on the naturally gifted athletes. They praise innate ability. They create hierarchies based on who's the best right now, not who's working hardest to improve. These coaches might have some short-term success with talented teams, but they create fragile athletes who panic when things get hard, who blame others for mistakes, who can't handle criticism, who peak early and burn out. Dr. Morgan studied competitive swimmers across different programs. Some programs were coached with a fixed mindset. Coaches praised natural talent, focused exclusively on the fastest swimmers, and emphasized winning above all else. Other programs were coached with a growth mindset. Coaches praised improvement and effort, gave attention to all swimmers based on their commitment to getting better, and emphasized personal bests over comparative rankings. Over a 5-year period, growth mindset programs produced more swimmers who made it to elite levels. Why? Because they created a culture where everyone kept improving, where setbacks didn't destroy confidence, where the focus was on long-term development rather than short-term results. The fixed mindset programs had some early stars, but many burned out or plateaued. When things got tough, when they faced better competition, when they hit the inevitable wall that every athlete hits, they didn't have the mindset to push through. One swimmer from a growth mindset program said something revealing. "I was never the fastest kid on my team, but my coach convinced me that I could keep getting faster if I worked at it. So I did. And now I'm swimming in college on a scholarship. A lot of kids who were faster than me when we were 12 aren't even swimming anymore. They gave up when it got hard because they thought being fast was about talent, not work." The cultural context. Mindset isn't just shaped by individuals, it's shaped by culture. Different cultures send different messages about ability and effort. American culture tends toward fixed mindset messages. We celebrate prodigies and natural talent. We have phrases like, he's a born leader or she's naturally gifted. We watch shows like America's Got Talent that search for people with innate abilities. This cultural messaging creates a fixed mindset environment where people believe you either have it or you don't. In contrast, many Asian cultures have traditionally emphasized effort over ability. There's a Chinese saying, "The person who says he can and the person who says he cannot are both correct." The emphasis is on what you do, not what you are. Research shows that Asian students tend to have more growth-oriented mindsets about academic ability. When they struggle, they work harder. When they fail, they study more. This isn't because they're naturally smarter. It's because their culture has given them a different mindset. Dr. Morgan conducted a fascinating cross-cultural study. She gave students in America and Japan difficult puzzles to solve. When students struggled, researchers observed their reactions. American students who struggled often gave up quickly, saying things like, "I'm not good at puzzles." Japanese students who struggled persisted much longer, saying things like, "I haven't figured out the right approach yet." Same puzzles, different cultural contexts, different mindsets, different outcomes. The good news is that culture can change. As growth mindset research has spread, more schools, companies, and organizations are deliberately creating growth mindset cultures. They're changing their language, their practices, their reward systems, all to send the message that abilities can be developed. But it requires conscious effort. The default cultural messages still emphasize talent and innate ability. You have to actively resist those messages and create new ones. Breaking the cycle. If you're a parent, teacher, or coach reading this, you might be thinking, "Oh no, have I been doing this all wrong? Have I created a fixed mindset in my child/student/athlete?" First, take a breath. Awareness is the first step to change. You can't change what you don't recognize. Second, understand that it's never too late. Mindsets can shift at any age. Children and adults are remarkably capable of change when given the right messages and experiences. Third, start small. You don't have to transform everything overnight. Just start paying attention to your language. Instead of, "You're so smart," try, "You worked really hard on that." Instead of, "You're a natural," try, "I can see how much you've practiced." Instead of, "You're not good at this," try, "You haven't mastered this yet." That one word, "yet," is incredibly powerful. It acknowledges current reality while leaving room for growth. Create environments where struggle is normalized and celebrated. Share your own struggles and what you learned from them. Praise effort, strategy, and persistence. Respond to mistakes with curiosity, not judgment. Focus on improvement, not perfection. Emphasize learning over performance. Most importantly, model a growth mindset yourself. Talk about things you're learning. Share how you're working on getting better at something. Let them see you struggle, make mistakes, and persist. Children don't just listen to what you say. They watch what you do. If you tell them effort matters, but they see you give up when things get hard, they'll learn from your actions, not your words. The mindsets we create in others are the most important legacy we leave. Will you create people who shrink from challenges or people who embrace them? People who hide from failure or people who learn from it? People who believe they're fixed or people who believe they can grow? The choice is yours. Part 5. The transformation, the moment of recognition. Let me tell you about the moment everything changed for me. I was 37 years old, sitting in my car in a parking lot after a failed job interview. It was my third rejection in 2 months. I've been so confident going in. I had the credentials, the experience, the resume. But somehow, I kept falling short. As I sat there, something inside me whispered the familiar refrain, "You're just not good enough. Other people have what it takes. You don't." And then, for the first time in my life, I stopped and really listened to that voice. Where was it coming from? Was it true? Or was it just a story I'd been telling myself for so long that it felt like truth? I thought back to my childhood. I remembered my father watching me struggle with algebra homework, shaking his head, saying, "Math just isn't your thing, is it?" I remembered my high school guidance counselor suggesting I pursue more realistic career options. I remembered all the times I'd started something new, hit difficulty, and immediately concluded I wasn't talented enough to continue. Sitting at that parking lot, I realized something profound. I'd spent my entire adult life operating from a fixed mindset I'd absorbed as a child. I'd been living inside a story someone else had written for me, never questioning whether it was true. That was the moment I decided to rewrite the story. This chapter is about how to do exactly that, how to recognize the fixed mindset patterns running the background of your life, and how to deliberately, consciously, systematically change them. It won't be easy, but it's absolutely possible. Step 1. Recognizing your fixed mindset triggers. The first step in changing your mindset is learning to recognize when you're in it. Fixed mindset doesn't announce itself with a trumpet blast. It whispers. It operates in the background. It feels like truth. Here are the telltale signs. In the face of challenge, you think, "This is too hard for me. I'll probably fail anyway. Other people can do this, but I can't. If I can't do it easily, I'm not good at it." When you receive criticism, you feel defensive and attacked. The need to make excuses, like your worth is being questioned, tempted to blame others or external circumstances. When you make a mistake, you think, "I'm such an idiot. I always mess things up. This proves I'm not capable. Everyone will think less of me." When others succeed, you feel threatened or diminished, jealous or resentful, like their success highlights your inadequacy, competitive in an unhealthy way. When you're struggling to learn something new, you think, "I'm too old to learn this. I don't have the brain for this. Some people are just naturally good at this. I'm not. This is taking too long. I should already know this." Notice these aren't rational thoughts. They're emotional reactions rooted in a belief system about fixed abilities, and they're incredibly common. Everyone has them sometimes. Dr. Morgan's research team developed what they called the Mindset Awareness Journal. For 2 weeks, participants recorded every time they noticed fixed mindset thoughts. They didn't try to change them yet. They just noticed them. The results were eye-opening. Most people discovered they had way more fixed mindset thinking than they realized. These thoughts have been running on autopilot for so long that people didn't even recognize them as thoughts. They just felt like reality. One participant, a lawyer named Rebecca, said, "I always thought I was confident, growth-oriented. But when I started paying attention, I realized that every time I faced a challenging case, I panicked. I'd think, what if I'm not smart enough to win this? I'd been operating from fear my entire career, and I never even realized it. The awareness alone, just noticing these patterns, began to change them. When you recognize a fixed mindset thought, it loses some of its power. You can start to see it as just a thought, not the truth. Step 2. Understanding your fixed mindset persona. Dr. Morgan developed a powerful technique she called naming your fixed mindset persona. The idea is to externalize the fixed mindset voice, to see it as a character rather than as your true self. Think of it like this. Imagine your fixed mindset is a worried, protective part of you. Maybe it sounds like a critical parent or a scared child. Maybe it has a name. Maybe it even has a face. When I did this exercise, I realized my fixed mindset sounded exactly like my middle school gym teacher, Coach Patterson. He was a gruff, impatient man who believed kids were either athletic or they weren't. I was firmly in the not athletic category, and he made sure I knew it. Decades later, whenever I faced any physical challenge, I heard Coach Patterson's voice. "You're not coordinated enough for this. Don't embarrass yourself." I'd internalized his judgment so deeply that it became my own voice. Once I recognized this, I could talk back to it. When I heard that voice say, "You can't do this," I could respond, "That's just Coach Patterson talking. He was wrong about me then, and that voice is wrong about me now." Naming your fixed mindset persona creates psychological distance. It helps you see that these thoughts aren't objective truth. They're just old programming that can be updated. Try this. Think about your fixed mindset voice. What does it sound like? Is it male or female, young or old, loud or subtle? Does it remind you of anyone in your life? Give it a name. Then, next time you hear it, you can recognize it. Oh, there's the name again, trying to keep me safe by keeping me small. This recognition is the first step toward choosing a different response. Step 3. Talking back to the fixed mindset. Once you can recognize your fixed mindset thoughts, you can begin to challenge them. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about logical counter-arguments based on evidence. Here's how it works. Fixed mindset says, "I'm not good at public speaking." Growth mindset response, "I'm not skilled at public speaking yet." But it's a skill that can be learned. What specific aspects could I practice? Who could give me feedback? What resources could help me improve? Fixed mindset says, "I failed, so I'm a failure." Growth mindset response, "I had a failure, which means I tried something difficult. What can I learn from this? What would I do differently next time? This experience gives me information I didn't have before." Fixed mindset says, "She's naturally talented. I could never do that." Growth mindset response, "She's developed impressive skills. I wonder how much practice that took. What strategies did she use? Could I learn from her approach? Her success shows what's possible." Fixed mindset says, "If this is hard, it means I'm not smart enough." Growth mindset response, "If this is hard, it means I'm learning. My brain is literally forming new connections right now. Struggle is what growth feels like." Notice the pattern? You're not denying reality or pretending everything is easy. You're reframing difficulty as normal, as part of the learning process, as temporary rather than permanent. One technique Dr. Morgan teaches is called yet thinking. Whenever you catch yourself saying, "I can't," add the word yet. "I can't do this yet. I don't understand this yet. I'm not good at this yet." That tiny word transforms a statement of permanent limitation into an acknowledgement of current status, with room for growth. It's simple but remarkably powerful. Step 4. Taking growth mindset action. Understanding growth mindset intellectually isn't enough. You have to practice it behaviorally. You have to do things that scare you, that you might fail at, that will require sustained effort. This is where most people get stuck. They read about growth mindset, they understand it, they believe in it, and then they don't actually change their behavior. Why? Because changing behavior is uncomfortable. Growth mindset action requires deliberately putting yourself in situations where you might look foolish. Sign up for that salsa dancing class even though you have no rhythm. Try painting even though you've never held a brush. Speak up in meetings even though you might say something wrong. You'll struggle. Take on projects at work that stretch your abilities. Learn a language. Train for a race. Choose the hard thing over the easy thing. You'll receive criticism. Ask for honest feedback from people whose judgment you trust. Submit your work for review. Put yourself in situations where others can evaluate your performance. You'll fail. Try things where success isn't guaranteed. Launch that business. Ask that person out. Apply for that stretch position. Accept that you might not succeed and do it anyway. Each of these actions rewires your brain. Each time you do something uncomfortable and survive it, you're building new neural pathways. You're teaching yourself at a cellular level that your abilities can grow. Let me tell you about Marcus, a different Marcus from earlier. He was a 52-year-old accountant who'd spent 30 years in the same role, doing the same work, never taking risks. He was good at his job, but he felt stuck. Marcus read about growth mindset and decided to make a change. He identified one area he'd always been afraid of, technology. He'd convinced himself he was too old and not a tech person. So he did something terrifying. He signed up for a coding boot camp. The average age of participants was 24. Marcus was by far the oldest person in the room. The first week was brutal. He felt stupid. He struggled with concepts that younger students seemed to grasp immediately. His fixed mindset screamed at him, "See, you're too old for this. You don't have the brain for it. Quit now before you embarrass yourself further." But Marcus had prepared for this. He'd written himself a letter to read when things got hard. In it, he reminded himself that struggle means learning, that he was forming new neural pathways, that age was irrelevant to brain plasticity. He kept going. He asked questions. So many questions. He stayed after class for extra help. He formed a study group with younger students who were patient with his learning pace. He celebrated small victories, understanding a concept, debugging a program, completing a project. 3 months later, Marcus graduated from the boot camp. Was he the best coder in his class? No. Did that matter? Also, no, he'd proven something far more important to himself. He could learn hard things. He wasn't fixed. He could grow. He later told me, "The coding skills are great, but the real transformation was mental. I spent 30 years believing I was too old, too stuck, too limited to change. Now I know that was a lie. I feel like I woke up from a long sleep." That's growth mindset action. Not just thinking differently, but doing differently. Step 5. Building a growth mindset environment. You can't do this alone. The environment around you either reinforces your growth mindset or undermines it. You need to deliberately create an environment that supports growth. This means surrounding yourself with growth mindset people. Find friends, colleagues, mentors who embrace challenges, who talk about their failures openly, who celebrate effort over outcomes. Their mindset will influence yours. Curating your inputs, what you read, watch, and listen to, shapes your thinking. Follow people who inspire growth. Read biographies of people who persevere through difficulty. Listen to podcasts about learning and development. Avoid content that glorifies effortless success or innate talent. Creating systems that reward effort. If you're a manager, recognize employees for innovation and risk-taking, not just results. If you're a parent, praise your kids' process, not their outcomes. If you're working on personal goals, track effort metrics, hours practiced, strategies tried, feedback received, not just achievement metrics. Normalizing failure. Share your mistakes. Talk about what you're learning. Create spaces where it's safe to try and fail. Celebrate lessons learned from failures just as much as you celebrate successes. Seeking out a challenge. Build difficulty into your life deliberately. Take on projects outside your comfort zone. Learn things you're bad at. Put yourself in situations where you're the least experienced person in the room. One company I consulted with transformed their culture by implementing Failure Fridays. Every Friday afternoon, employees gathered to share their biggest failure of the week and what they learned from it. The CEO always went first, modeling vulnerability and learning. At first, people were reluctant. Failure felt shameful. But over time, the culture shifted. Failure became destigmatized. People started taking more risks, innovating more freely, learning more quickly. Productivity and creativity soared. That's the power of environment. Individual mindset is important, but collective mindset is transformative. Step 6. Practicing mindset in relationships. Growth mindset in relationships might be the hardest application and the most important. Fixed mindset in relationships sounds like, this is just who I am. Accept me or leave. If we have problems, we're not meant to be together. People don't change. You're not meeting my needs. I should find someone who does. Growth mindset in relationships sounds like, I'm working on improving this aspect of myself. We have challenges we can work through together. People can change and grow. How can we both get better at meeting each other's needs? The shift seems subtle, but the implications are massive. Rachel and Tom have been married for 12 years. They'd hit a rough patch. Lots of arguments, growing resentment, increasing distance. Rachel's fixed mindset told her, we're just not compatible anymore. Maybe we made a mistake getting married. Instead of filing for divorce, Rachel decided to apply growth mindset thinking to her marriage. She stopped asking, is this the right relationship? And started asking, how can we build a better relationship? She and Tom went to counseling. They had hard conversations. They identified patterns they wanted to change. They practiced new communication strategies. They worked on it deliberately, consistently, painfully. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Old patterns resurfaced. But they kept going, treating their relationship as something they were building together, not something that either existed perfectly or didn't exist at all. 3 years later, their marriage was stronger than it had ever been, not because they'd found perfect compatibility, but because they'd built it through effort, learning, and commitment to growth. This applies to all relationships, friendships, family, professional. When you approach relationships with a growth mindset, You stop expecting perfection and start enabling improvement. You stop judging and start supporting. You stop blaming and start collaborating. The neuroscience of change. Here's something that should give you tremendous hope. Your brain is designed for change. For decades, scientists believed the brain was essentially fixed after early childhood. The conventional wisdom was that you were stuck with the brain you had by age 25. Any change after that was minimal at best. Then came the revolution in neuroscience. Brain imaging studies revealed something extraordinary. The brain remains plastic, capable of forming new connections, developing new capabilities, and literally changing its structure throughout your entire life. Every time you learn something new, your brain creates new synaptic connections. Every time you practice a skill, those connections strengthen. Every time you struggle with a challenging concept, your brain is actively rewiring itself. There's a study of stroke victims who lost function in parts of their brain. Through intensive therapy, many were able to regain function because other parts of their brain literally rewired to take over the damaged area's jobs. If brains can do that after stroke, imagine what they can do when you're healthy and deliberately practicing. The key is understanding how neuroplasticity works. Your brain doesn't change from passive exposure. You can't just read about playing the piano and develop piano-playing neural pathways. You have to actually practice. And here's the crucial part. The practice has to be effortful. Your brain changes most when you're at the edge of your current ability, struggling with something just beyond what you can currently do. That struggle, that feeling of your brain working hard, is the feeling of neurons forming new connections. Comfort doesn't change your brain. Challenge does. This is why growth mindset is so powerful. When you believe struggle is bad, you avoid it, and your brain doesn't change. When you believe struggle is how you grow, you embrace it, and your brain physically transforms. The long game. Let me be honest with you. Changing your mindset isn't a quick fix. It's not a life hack. It's not a weekend workshop epiphany that solves everything. Changing your mindset is a practice, not a destination. It's something you do daily, sometimes hourly. You'll have growth mindset moments and fixed mindset moments. You'll make progress and have setbacks. You'll feel like you've transformed. And then something will trigger old patterns. That's normal, expected, part of the process. I've been consciously working on my mindset for 8 years now. I'm dramatically different than I was. I take on challenges I would have avoided. I handle criticism without getting defensive. I view failure as feedback. I keep learning and growing in ways I never thought possible. But I still have fixed mindset moments. I still hear that old voice sometimes telling me I'm not capable, that I should play it safe, that I should quit while I'm ahead. The difference is now I recognize it for what it is, just a voice, not the truth, and I can choose a different response. That's what mindset work gives you, not perfection but choice, not the elimination of fear, but the courage to act despite it, not the absence of self-doubt, but the ability to push forward anyway. Think of mindset like fitness. You don't go to the gym once and become fit forever. You have to keep training, keep practicing, keep showing up. Some days are easier than others. Some days you feel strong, other days you struggle. But over time, with consistency, you become stronger, more capable, more resilient. Mindset is the same. Every day you're training your brain to respond to challenges, criticism, and failure in new ways. Some days you'll do it well. Some days you'll fall back into old patterns, but over time, the new patterns become stronger, more automatic, more natural. Your invitation to grow. So here's my question for you. What are you going to do with this information? You could read this, find it interesting, and change nothing. That's what most people do. They consume information but don't transform behavior. They understand concepts intellectually but don't integrate them experientially. Or you could decide that today, right now, is when you start living differently. You could identify one fixed mindset belief that's been limiting you and challenge it. You could take on one challenge you've been avoiding. You could have one difficult conversation you've been postponing. You could try one new thing you're afraid you'll be bad at. You don't have to transform everything at once. You just have to take one step in a growth direction. Maybe that step is signing up for a class in something you've always wanted to learn. Maybe it's asking for feedback you've been afraid to hear. Maybe it's applying for a position you don't feel qualified for yet. Maybe it's having an honest conversation with someone you love about how you can both grow together. Whatever it is, the step itself matters less than the decision to take it, because once you take one growth mindset action, it becomes easier to take another and another. And before you know it, you're living a completely different life. The person you could become, the version of you that's been waiting on the other side of your fear, your self-doubt, your fixed beliefs. That person is real. They're not a fantasy. They're a possibility that becomes more real every time you choose growth over safety, challenge over comfort, learning over knowing. Your mindset isn't your destiny, it's your starting point. Where you go from here is entirely up to you. Dr. Morgan ends her research papers with a simple but profound statement. Mindset change is possible. The question isn't whether you can change, but whether you will choose to. So what's your choice? Will you stay in the familiar confines of fixed beliefs about yourself, or will you step into the uncomfortable, exhilarating, transformative space of growth? Will you protect your current self-image, or will you pursue your highest potential? Will you let fear of failure keep you small, or will you let curiosity about what's possible make you brave? The path of growth isn't easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. And on the other side of the difficulty, the struggle, the repeated failures and awkward attempts and humbling mistakes, on the other side of all that is a version of yourself you can barely imagine right now. A version that doesn't shrink, a version that doesn't quit, a version that keeps learning, keeps growing, keeps becoming. That version is waiting for you. All you have to do is take the first step. Toplum kellum sayısı, tam 4,0 kelime conclusion. Your mindset is the lens through which you see the world, interpret experiences, and make decisions about what's possible for you. It's been shaped by decades of messages, experiences, and cultural conditioning. But it's not fixed. It never was. The research is clear. People who believe their abilities can be developed through effort, learning, and persistence dramatically outperform those who believe abilities are fixed. Not because they're more talented, but because they're willing to do what talent alone will never achieve. They're willing to struggle, fail, learn, and try again. This isn't about positive thinking. It's about accurate thinking. The fixed mindset is based on a lie. The lie that you are who you are and can't fundamentally change. The growth mindset is based on truth. The truth that your brain is plastic, your abilities are developable, and your potential is far greater than you imagine. You've now learned how mindset shapes success in sports, business, relationships, and every other domain of life. You've seen the science behind how beliefs change behavior, and behavior changes outcomes. You've learned practical strategies for recognizing and challenging fixed mindset patterns. Now comes the most important part, what you do next. Knowledge without action is just entertainment. The question isn't whether you understand growth mindset. The question is whether you'll live it. Start today. Choose one area where you've been operating from a fixed mindset, one belief about yourself that limits you, one challenge you've been avoiding, and take one small step toward growth. Your future self is waiting to thank you.